busy Christmas schedule.
There's probably an argument for both cases. They may have done it early because they realise maybe that they want to try and give whoever they're going to maybe appoint the best possible chance that they can. You know, they're still outside the drop, the 3 at the bottom, outside the drop zone. But I go back to the recruitment of Steve Cooper. And I think that the Leicester board, and for them to appoint him after Maresca, we're seeing what Maresca's doing at Chelsea. It's a totally different kind of football. You look at the Leicester forums and you read some of the stuff, they say that even when they're getting results, it's not entertaining football. It seemed like a poor appointment when you consider what Maresca done, like I said, and you just felt like he was on borrowed time. And then you add into that the biggest rivals are Forest, and you know, I mean, it's a nightmare for Leicester fans.
Yeah, I think the problem for them was that they believed maybe they were going to be punished more heavily than they were over the off-the-field situation. So the recruitment was a bit tentative, and they should have bought more players. My understanding is that he wanted 2 ready-made first-team players to go into the side in January. He wasn't going to get that. The team hadn't been playing well, the players were unhappy with him. The suggestion was that Graham Potter was the man they wanted in the summer. They couldn't get him, so they moved for him.
That feels about
late.
right, to be honest, because they need somebody.
Taking over from Maresca anyway.
You feel like they needed somebody. If they've got all those problems, like you rightly mentioned there, they need somebody who's going to be able to coach that team to get results. And at the moment, they don't look like they're nowhere near it.
Graham Potter's been linked today, hasn't he? And I think obviously Steve Cooper, like you mentioned, linking to Nottingham Forest, similar to when Rafa Benitez, you know, went to Everton, Liverpool. It's difficult for fans, but I think the fact they're in 16th place and just got promoted. I mean, it's not like, what do fans want, to win games or play pretty football? That's an ideal scenario, isn't it? But at the same time, you know, Vardy and Didi, they don't look like they have the right amount of kind of tactical guidance. But was Steve Cooper the one they wanted in the first place? Like you mentioned, Darren, probably not. But I don't think they're like, I mean, all the way down at the bottom, there's 1 point between the teams, you know, so it's not like they're down at the bottom like Luton were when they're not winning games. You know, it's not like that situation.
They just went, the way they're playing, Lee, you just can't see them sustaining the kind of a game plan that's going to beat teams regularly.
But
that's what they're probably afraid of.
I mean, yesterday you saw, like, you know, with Jamie Vardy being up there, isolated on his own, they're just hoofing it forward. There was no tactical play. But again, I think sometimes the players have to take some responsibility as well. I think people do look to the managers, which I get for guidance, but we've been players. We know sometimes you might not like the manager's tactics. But you have to do your job, and I think sometimes in this modern-day football, players you have to hold their hands a lot of the time.
I think there are two points if I can, Kels. The fact that Leicester, with Jamie Vardy leading the line, have done some great things, but the very fact that we're talking about Vardy in relation to Leicester says everything. They need an injection of fresh blood in terms of recruitment. But the second thing is the direction they're going to go in. Do you get an experienced hand at the tiller to give them an identity, or do you get a young, ambitious, hungry manager? It looked for all the world as though, for example, Frank Lampard was going to be Coventry boss last week. That's gone cold. Is that because he's aware that there's an opportunity to work in the Premier League again? He would be a big name signing for them. He would be a high profile signing for them, as would Ruud van Nistelrooy as well, who's also talked about wanting to be in the Premier League. But are they both too inexperienced for a job like that, where staying in the best league in the world is all important?
I just wanted to come back to the point that you and Righty made about the Forest connection, because obviously Steve Cooper is a former Nottingham Forest boss. But the performance of Forest under Nuno Espirito Santo, I wonder if they're looking at that and thinking, well, there's a squad that was struggling, and are now at the other end of the table, surprising everybody under a different manager. And I wonder if that's maybe played into the thinking.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that it's not necessarily about them being worried about going down. I think it's about looking across the road and seeing but it's looking at the other team in the locality and saying they are doing great stuff. The only thing I would say is they have invested heavily, Forest, in the squad and the team, and Leicester haven't done that. And so for Steve Cooper, he was always on a sticky wicket with his Forest connections as well. I
still think the timing's weird, though. You know, it's a strange kind of timing of the situation. Like I said, they're not exactly playing terribly, but they are in 16th. So it's like, okay, where does the club want to go? I still think there is an element where they could go down. So it's yet to be determined. It's not like they're away from the relegation.
They need a bounce just because of
that they know who's coming in.
It feels like they might know who's coming in, Leon. The only thing I see with them is they want to do it as early as possible to give whoever's coming in the capability of at least getting them some kind of bounce.
So it's the wrong appointment in the first place.
Absolutely,
then?
that's where I was going to go with it.
I mean,
think
Potter
that you look at his record,
Graham Potter doesn't appear to want it as things stand. He didn't want it in the summer. Maybe he thinks, I don't want to be fighting relegation. It might take a substantial investment of cash in January for him to change his mind. I think that it might well be one of the other names that I mentioned. And if that were to be the case, that'd be great in terms of, again, big names, high profile, and I was going to say make Leicester kind of sexy again, if you like. But
I'm getting that happening.
But the point I'm making is that as far as but as far as Leicester is concerned, they do need something that is going to energise those players, because at the moment they're on a poor run of form. The players look demoralised. It needs something to re-energise them again.
Yeah.
The other thing that often happens as well is that there's a sort of snowball effect now at the bottom of the table. I mean, it feels like not this weekend, because a lot of the teams down at the bottom either got the win, or in the case of Southampton, actually didn't play, or could have got something from the game against Liverpool. But Wolves get the 4-1 win, and then you've got Ipswich, acquitting themselves really well against Manchester United. So it maybe doesn't feel that there are desperate times in the teams at the bottom of the table, but you just look at that. Maybe even Crystal Palace, who got the draw against Aston Villa, and you just wonder if they might start, if you get a couple of results now, starting to get a little bit twitchy because Leicester have gone.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we are at this stage now. It's football all the way till March, and there is an opportunity, if you can put a good run together, to pull away from that zone. But also, if you go on a bad run or continue on the run that Leicester have been on, you could be sucked even deeper into trouble. And I think that's part of the reason, as you say, why they might have.
Well, you touched upon it still being kind of circulating around Jamie Vardy, but they've got Steph Mavrodidi on the bench. He was at Juventus when I was there with the B team, scored goals in the Championship last year. So why is he then not having more of an integral role? I know the Championship's different to the Premier League when it comes to speed of play, but it's like you've got a young player that scored a lot of goals in the Championship, not really still playing second fiddle to Jamie Vardy. Now, we know how good Jamie Vardy's been, but for him to be up there on his own, isolated, with no real guidance behind him, tactically, I think, and like what Wrighty said, maybe yet to be determined if it's the right decision, because if they start climbing up the table and they get the manager in, still Frank Lampard being linked to these jobs just doesn't really sit right with me. I know he's going to be linked, but I think Ruud van Nistelrooy, deserves an opportunity like that. I think Frank Lampard, we know he did well at Derby, so he knows how to kind of get the best out of certain players and certain teams, maybe where the pressure isn't there as much. But I just think the fans never really warmed to Steve Cooper at all. And I think ultimately, as we've seen today, when you go online and you see all these different comments, no one's really saying, they're disappointed he's gone. Apart from people like us. Seems a bit harsh, in my opinion, to me.
There's a name for you, Lee Carsley.
Who is now no longer is about to be no longer the England manager.
That's why you get paid the big bucks. Start throwing out these names.
We will keep an eye on this. I'm fairly sure we're going to return to this. So we'll just say the average size box. Look, the other big story, as we've alluded to, was that victory for Tottenham against Manchester City. And I don't think Tottenham have a way of playing that is targeted actually to exactly where Manchester City's weaknesses are. Where Manchester City have been most vulnerable this season is where Tottenham have been at their best. Even with that, you look at Tottenham's away record, you look at Manchester City's record at the Etihad, you look at the fact they'd lost their previous 4, so obviously that has to turn around. And nobody, I think, could have plucked that 4-0 scoreline out the air.
Not 4, but that Tottenham have recently been able to beat them and cause them problems, whether it's at White Hart Lane or the Etihad. People talking about, they cannot continue talking about Rodri, and they cannot continue talking about things that they don't speak like critiquing the recruitment at City. They've got it wrong. You look at even Savino, it's 15 games, he hasn't scored. The form of Foden, when you need a backup centre, a backup to De Bruyne, you need a backup to Rodri, you need a backup to Erling Haaland, which they sold in Alvarez, a team that's aging. Now is the time where you look at them and say, well, recruitment's gone wrong somewhere along the line, massively, because whereas Tottenham had 4 or 5 players missing. Bentancur, Van der Ven, Richarlison, Romero, and then they had teenagers on the bench. So Tottenham are going there after losing to Ipswich, and you're thinking, well, what can this be? But then they sucked them in so beautifully. And remember, they're playing with Dragerson and Davis, a left back, and
they were brilliant as well.
Very good. But they did not, like Ange Postecoglou said, they didn't get afraid of what they had to do because they had to play through the press to get it to people like Maddison, for them to then get it to Kulusevski and Son. And that. It was brilliant from Tottenham. And against the City side, that at the moment, there's, you know, they're starting to look their age. They're starting to look how we perceive them now. We're
9
seeing
of the
them.
14 players that they used were 29 or over. De Bruyne looks like he's feeling his age. I think Haaland...
Yes, but they're only a year older than they were this time last year.
Yeah, but
the other
in the case of De Bruyne, for example, De Bruyne's had so many injury problems that... you can be 33 and be Mohamed Salah, who's in peak physical condition, or you can be 34 and be De Bruyne, who's just having little knocks and niggles and not having the kind of flow that he did have. I mean, you're right to say it's only a year on, but I less have a problem with the recruitment than I do with the fact that they bought in the summer really with a belief in the squad that they've already got. And I wonder if now that squad needs to be dismantled. And I think in the summer, or even in January, we'll see 1 or 2 players. I think Mendy maybe come in January, who would fill that role that he filled for Rodri in the European Championship final for Spain against England. And then I think we'll see other players come in the summer
that's
as well.
why he's signed.
But my concern for me, and I love Kyle Walker, but he doesn't look himself either. I mean, Timo Werner went past him. Kyle Walker very rarely gets beat 1v1. Going up against Timo Werner, I know Timo Werner was fresh coming into the game, but bringing back Gondwan, like those types of players, you know, and I feel like the certain players they let move on, they never really replaced them. Pep Guardiola to me doesn't look panicked, you know, and he's usually pre-match interviews, he's quite stern, isn't he? He doesn't really give much. After the game, he's coming up and he's fronting, and he's not really saying, he doesn't look panicked to me, but I think to like what Wright said, like Kevin De Bruyne, you know, he doesn't look himself. And you're right, Kel.
No, he's going to have to start at some stage to try to find out.
Because there's certain players like Kulusevski, I think, has been their best player this year. And I think when these things happen, when we see this massive shock result, in the way that it happened in the magnitude, it's often you focus on what City wasn't doing. But I think Tottenham were incredible. They're also a strange team, Tottenham, aren't they? They lose the games that they're supposed to win.
They lost against Ipswich.
Yeah, and then they win these games. But at the Etihad, their record's unbelievable.
But what you've got to understand with Postecoglou and what he's trying to do, he's trying to instill something in them, what they believe in, and continue to do, even when it's going wrong. Like he's played, again, Davis and Dragerson at centre-back, knowing that how strong City can be down there, but they're still trying to play it through. You've got to get that done, and you've got to test yourself against the best. I heard James Maddison saying it, and Kulusevski, so as you can say, yes, we can do it against them, we can do it against everybody. I can see Tottenham getting maybe a more consistent run, because he's going to start bringing players in. They're going to get more consistent with what they're doing, and they're going to do that to a lot more teams.
And they are fun to watch, Tottenham.
Yeah,
unless you're a Tottenham fan and you watch maybe the defeat by Ipswich and the other teams that they've lost to so far this season, where you think, what on earth's gone wrong? But when it goes right, they are.
It goes very right.
I'm happy for Maddison as well, because he, you know, after his injury, he didn't have the best of times, getting subbed the other week at half time. You know, it looked like Basuma and Sarr were going to be those two in there, and he had a brilliant game on his birthday, scoring 2 unbelievable goals.
The manager's really used him well in the way he's got him motivated to play in those games.
But you mentioned it as well, Leanne. That game now between Liverpool and Manchester City next weekend is huge, particularly with the gap at the top of the table being 8 points as things stand. As you said, Leanne, he's quite relaxed, Pep Guardiola, but usually after a defeat he comes out and talks about how well his team played, how good they were, how he was proud of them.
I love these guys.
That's what he normally does, but this time around he is actually being critical of them, critical of their performance, and saying, look, we need to find something here, we need to do something. It's a change of tone for him.
Yeah,
a change of words maybe, and not a change of tone.
I mean, what he's established himself is as a master of the right words to say in the right occasion, and it was quite interesting looking at that footage, because obviously when you're in a press conference as a reporter and you ask a manager, you know, is it going to be beyond you? Generally, you expect them to say, no, we can still do it. Actually, yes,
he said no.
It's all over. But I think his great strength is being able to articulate the picture as it is, so that the players are left in no doubt about where they are. If they can't turn it around, they won't be there anymore. And I do expect him to be quite brutal. I remember in 2022, people suggested he wouldn't sign a new deal and he couldn't rebuild the side like Sir Alex Ferguson used to, and he proved that he could do that. And he proved that he could bring through young players from the academy that could be exceptional. They've come back from big points differentials. I remember it was 10 points in 2018-19. That they came
not
back
at
from.
this stage.
Exactly.
So that's what's interesting about this. So Manchester United have been 9 points clear in the Premier League era. There've been two other things. I think Liverpool and City actually the two other times teams have been 8 points clear. And they've all gone on to win it. So now the question is, obviously Liverpool are in pole position, but does this mean that Liverpool are going to go on to win it? And maybe the question isn't, are City capable, particularly if they bring in reinforcements in January, of going on a long winning streak that can get them back in contention? But maybe the question is, do Arsenal and Liverpool have it in them to falter, to go on a run that, for example, City have been? I know it's 5 games in a row that they've lost, but it's 3 Premier League games in a row. So a City, a Liverpool and Arsenal capable of doing that at some stage to let City back in?
I think the season started brilliantly for Liverpool and they took full advantage of it. People talking about how easy it is to start. It's not easy to start. You have to make it easy. If you're supposed to be able to beat those teams, then you beat them. And Liverpool's done that apart from Forest. And they were under the radar until they started to really, their heads started to go above the parapet. But the fact is that they were under the radar, so they got on with it. Arsenal now need to kind of go on a run like that. Liverpool are very much the favourites now. Liverpool know that they can probably draw that game. But the games that they're going to have to win, obviously they're home games. And then they're going to have to make sure that they don't lose. And then it's Liverpool's to win. But then it's everything that comes in between those things. You know, Mo Salah and what's going on with Mo. Will that derail? What's going to happen with that?
Or is he playing a legacy season?
He could be playing a legacy season. It'd be brilliant for him, whatever happens. But the fact is, I'm pleased that Arsenal now are not in that limelight to have that pressure. It's Liverpool who know how to deal with it.
And I think that's interesting. They've gone from being a team who was supposed to be in transition this season to now a team who are in contention this season. And I just wonder about, as you said, there are a lot of players in there who have won the title with them before, so they know what this is. But there are also players in there who haven't done that as a collective. And I just wonder about that shift in mentality from kind of challengers to contenders.
But I was saying to you before, Kels, like, I feel like Jurgen Klopp must be watching this Premier League season thinking, what is going on? Because I feel like they're almost, Man City are gifting it to Arsenal, Liverpool. It's like, are Liverpool playing well? Yeah. Are Arsenal playing well? Okay. But I think Manchester City are nowhere near the levels they have been. Arne Slot's done an incredible job so far, but I do think, there's always that link around Arsenal with pressure. When it comes down to it, missing out when they said, when Arsenal went out of the Europa League, they'll go on to win the league. It didn't work. So there's a mentality problem there for me at that club, and I want them to do well. I spent 12 amazing years at that club. So I think, the way that Manchester City, I don't think anybody saw this coming, but they do have the quality. They still have the quality, but they need to find a way.
Yeah, but then what's happened is that people have seen that they're capable of getting their nose bled. It's just like you can hurt City. I think what we saw with Tottenham, and I keep saying about the 2 central defenders, who I thought was going to be under amazing pressure, immense pressure. It didn't happen. They were still able to play out under City's press, which wasn't as intense as it should be. Other teams will see that. And what is so ruthless about the Premier League is that people are watching everything, and they will see that with City. And then all that happens is you keep them under pressure, you break a couple of times against them, you nick a goal. City are in that place again. Do not be surprised to see more of this happening to City.
I'm just surprised that without Rodri, they don't have the leadership, they don't have that protection for the back four, they don't have that player who's going to get the key goal to get them going again. He provided so much. The numbers, I think you've done the numbers already. They've only lost 2 out of 78 games when he's not played. And that tells you a lot about his impact. And I was thinking to myself, well, can it really be that one man has that transformative an effect? But then you take Virgil van Dijk out of Liverpool, as he was after the Merseyside derby. Exactly. Odegaard from Arsenal. There are so many examples of individual players who have a huge impact on their team.
It's also injuries, and so yes, Rodri goes, but then they have injuries in defence. So then you haven't got the cover and you haven't got the regular. Similarly with the Van Dijk missing season at Liverpool, they then had injuries to central defenders. Then they had to put Jordan Henderson into. So then they lose him from midfield. It's the knock-on effect rather than the.
Absolutely. And I think for City, they've got no backup striker because they've sold Alvarez. They've got no backup central defensive midfielder because even Kovacic isn't available, as you were saying. So, stripped of all of those options, suddenly they look defenceless, and that's why so many teams now have confidence going to the Etihad. And Whereas before, all the games had lost 4 different competitions all the way from home. This one is at home where they've been invincible for 2 years and suddenly they do look beatable.